Welcome everyone to another episode of Away from the Keyboards. I am your host, Rui, and today I speak with Simone. He's an entrepreneur and engineering leader with more than a decade of experience and an interesting journey. Today, we'll learn a little bit more about his journey, how it was, how he saw the industry grow, and also, most important, what advices and stories does he have to share so that other people can learn from his mistakes. So without any more spoilers, Simone, welcome to the show.
Hi, Rui. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you for coming. You have an amazing background with one of the programming languages that I both love and hate. But before we dive into that particular part, tell me a little bit about your journey in tech and into tech leadership. How did it happen? What was some of the main problems that you found along the way?
Yeah, so I would say that I didn't really have a typical journey where you start as a junior, then you go into more a career, and then you end up maybe in a management or leadership position. I think that I've always been kind of a natural leader. Also at school, or when I was playing football, I was always like playing in the middle field, or I was trying always to get people together and do things together. And indeed, when I early career, one of my early job was basically being a co-founder for a startup where I joined another person, and I think that. How it started for me, so really the hard way. It was really an interesting part, but then after that, I always did a bit of leadership roles back on individual contributors role, and then back again. So it was always a bit like a roller coaster for me to get to where I was. Yeah. So by saying that, basically, let's say my highlights in my career were when I was technical co-founder for a startup here in Amsterdam. And I was, for 4 years, we tried to build a startup with another person. We also had investments. We went through all the phases of growing the company. But then, I would say we were really like the first time doing it, a bit like we really didn't know what we were doing. A lot of lessons learned. But it was really nice there because I started really building an organization, so hiring juniors, so understanding what it meant to, let's say, merging technology with people. And then after that, 3 years later, I found out myself in a role of leading an engineering organization in a scale-up at Housing Anywhere, where basically, actually, I started doing it when we were full on COVID. And I think that was one of the hardest period of my career, where basically I got into the role and I was super excited, but at the same time, like everything was like a mess. Like we were really like scrambling around to make do with all the COVID situation that just unfolded. And it was really, really great to go through that period because it gave me the chance also to really to build from scratch something. And then eventually we scaled that organization quite successfully. So then today I am I'm doing something that I wanted to do for a while, which is basically being on my own. So I'm working now. I'm starting my own consultancy, but at the same time, I'm also working with another person as a co-founder on a startup that we should be able to launch soon. So yeah, this is a bit me and my story.
Can you tell a little bit about that startup?
Yeah, the startup. The name is With Them, and the startup is. Of course, in the space of AI, and we will try to build an AI coach for let's say first-time founders who are building their own companies. So I'm partnering with a person. She's a coach, and she's an amazing coach, and she has this very structured approach in understanding the phase of a startup, understanding what are the next steps, what are the next priorities to validate the concept of the product, and really to take the right steps. And we're trying to put it in a set of agents, would say, that can really help startup founders to really use these tools and like use it as a first step to understand what to do next before they really go into more expensive coaching products. And there is a lot more about the startup, but we're building it, and and it's I hope in a couple of weeks we'll be out there.
Nice. Hopefully we can bring you again for a future episode to go more deep dive on that startup.
I would love it.
Awesome. You touch upon on an interesting part on your first question, and kind of matches up a bit with my experience. So the first time I did a leadership role, like an official leadership role, was exactly in the COVID time. Yeah, it was strange. It was the first time that we were doing interviews with other people without even seeing someone managing a completely remote team because those were the rules of the game. So curious, what was some of the hurdles that you had during that time?
Yeah, so the story was that is that I was at that period I was engineering manager of one of the key teams of the organization, and I think the engineering team was around 20-25 people, I remember. And this was January 2020, before COVID really hit, when the former VP of engineering he decided to leave. And then soon after, basically there was the problem of COVID, and since in my organization, Housing Anywhere, we were relocating people abroad. It basically all of a sudden the business went flat. So the problem was that when after 6 months, basically the CEO asked me, "Hey, how about we're trying to hire a VP, but it's being hard. How about you help us with the organization?" And eventually, basically, I took the role. During that period, it was really like the difficult part was really to kind of navigate the uncertainties that was happening, because we were a very transparent company. Every day we would have reports of revenue and so on, and you would see all of a sudden like revenue dropping crazily. And on the same time, we had a lot of people that were on visa. So people on visa, especially in engineering, they were like really afraid, okay, what's going to happen to me if I don't have a job anymore and so on. So what happened is that when I took the organization, I took the engineering team, the main problem that I had to face was a very high level of attrition. So everyone was basically leaving. I remember my first 10 weeks, I had 10 resignations letters in my emails, and I really had a kind of a trauma to open my inbox, my email, to kind of say, okay, where is the next one? And it was really difficult. At the same time, we didn't really have a very strong HR as a typical company that is moving from startup to scale up. We didn't have a proper HR, proper recruitment processes. We didn't even really have a very good salary bands and so forth. So it was very a difficult challenge to tackle. And I think that was really that where I moved much more from managing the projects, managing the technology of a team, to really managing an organization, and especially the people problem a bit of at scale, let's say. So it was really, really, I think I would say that I did that role for 4 years, but especially the first 2 years to rebuild all of that, it felt like there were 5-6 years I was doing the job, because there was really a lot going on to get us out from that situation.
And if you had to put your thumb on the scale, because you've done it all, you've done the technical part and you've done the people part more because of that COVID, which one would you consider is the most challenging one, if you think that one of them is more challenging than the other?
Oh yeah, I do think the managing people, managing an organization is really much more challenging. It's really a totally different. I would say a totally different job, because often people are great engineers, software engineers, even great managers or team leads, and then they get promoted to roles where they need to start managing managers, or they need to kind of handle 20 or more people, where there is a lot of difference between people, also in terms of personal stories. I do think the level of complexity and the layers you have on that is really, really hard, and it makes it also very, I would say it's not really like it's in technology, you kind of know, okay, you do something and you can be sure, okay, that is going to work. With people, with organizations, and also with like dealing also with management teams and setting expectations towards them, it's really like more nuanced. So you really have to also be able to kind of do a bit of politics, be able to sell, to communicate. So soft skills part is really, really something that becomes very important. Yeah.
One of the things that we are starting in this podcast is a recurrent segment where we give a guest the opportunity to ask another guest a question. So we are calling it copy paste. So the question from our previous guest, which was the Agile Wizard, he asked, what is something you did that left a great impact in your team?
I think it's a question we should ask people that were in my teams, so they can answer it better. No, I do believe that the funny thing is that after I left my role at Housing Anywhere, I was VP of engineering, and then I left. I kept meeting the people from Housing Anywhere, because we were still friends and we had very good relationship. I often asked the question, hey, with a hindsight, what do you think I did really well? What do you think I didn't do? I could have done better, right? Also, now they have a new VP of engineering, also a bit of comparison in that sense. I think that what really I do believe I did really well was I think that really making the changing the culture in organization, where moving from a culture where technology was really the key towards like where the product and the value that the product brings to the business becomes important. There were a lot of different initiatives that over the years I did or I introduced in during that period to kind of shape that culture differently. Because I remember, for example, before we had before I took the role, and also a bit like during the first period, we had a kind of a very conflictual environment where it was very easy to kind of get into these very long discussions, into the PR reviews, into the like people really not liking each other's approach to technology. But then after, it became much, much different, where the approach was more like, okay, let's figure it out together. Let's work together with the product manager. This was also another thing that really was important. And I did that. I think that was one of the most impactful things. And that's what people tell me, because also help people to be teams to be more autonomous, less, let's say, reliant on top-down information. And that was really, really something that I observed really created a lot of value and a positive culture in the organization. Yeah.
Do you think that could be the history of the company as it moves from a startup to a scale up, that you need to move a bit more outside of the what before was the technology to drive the product, to becoming more the product driving the technology?
I don't think so. Definitely, there is. I think it really depends on the management, or really from the leadership point of view, from how the what is expected and what is also allowed. So, for example, I had the opportunity to build that culture, right? So I was really well understood when I was taking the moves, right? The investment I was making, when I was directing the budget. And I think that was really because there was a leadership, there was the CEO, Asking Anywhere, and the CPO, and the people I was working with that were really, really aligned with what we were trying to achieve. For example, another organization where I was working it was very different. There were still scale up and everything, kind of similar phases, but you could see there a totally different approach towards much more technology. So it was all about making the technology better, rebuilding it, super polished architecture, and there was also a lot of divide between engineering and product, which to me also is kind of a big problem, especially in this type of companies. So I would say that it depends on the leadership. It depends. Now, if companies get to that point, the companies get to the point means that maybe the leadership knows what is doing, what they're doing. So that could be a good chance that we get to that type of situation, yeah, type of culture.
And one of the things that we spoke before is that you started doing a bit of the move back into more of a technical role from the people personal role. And I'm curious, what was the motivation behind that move?
Yeah, I think that, as I said, I've always been, I've never really been chasing a career in a sense, like, okay, I want to become CTO, VP, or I've never really was that type of person. I think things just, it kind of, I followed the flow a bit. I follow how it was going. And in general, I have a technical background also at university. I've always been very kind of technical in a sense. So I've always been really passionate about systems, or architecting or designing those systems. And I think, the funny thing is that also an organization of people is a system, right? So putting together with the technology, especially when you want to, the term is, I think it's called the socio-technical aspect of an organization, is really, really interesting. So how people impact technology and the other way around. So in a sense, I've been spending many years on building, let's say, designing a system which was of people and organization. And I think when I left Housing Anywhere, I kind of like still had that itch. Like, okay, I would really like to do, I don't know, to kind of like polish again my technical skills, empathize again with individual contributors on what they go through day to day. And also, configuring my Neovim setup, because it was really kind of like I wasn't using it for a while, and also setting it up for AI now. So it was really like, I don't know, I started like tinkering and so on and so forth. And then there was a role of staff engineer that came through also from a domain, which was the electric vehicle charging, so EV charging domain, which was really, really interesting. And especially the architectural side of it. Like, so there are protocols that is very decentralized, there is hardware involved. And it's really, really, yeah, kind of like like when I met the VP in that company, I said, "Oh, I really like it. I just would like to do that." And yeah, it was amazing. So I just went back, and I think it's very. So it wasn't very expected. It was I never really had a straight career. It's more like for me, yeah, I felt like doing it, and in the same time, I wanted to hone again my skills, understand what's going on in the for a software engineer with all this AI revolution, all this change of workflows, way of working that we are experiencing today, and again empathizing again with who is on the is basically doing the work more on the operational tactical level, because then I will when I will be working again in a strategy level, I can understand better what's going on. Yeah, so it's this is how it went.
How do you see the industry changing and the role of the software engineer changing in these more recent years with the advent of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I'm experiencing it on my own, because also on the startup I'm building, I'm trying really more and more and more to apply the vibe coding approach, still with a software engineering eye. So I'm not just let some system going nuts, but I just like follow and review everything that is happening. It's a really interesting question, because I honestly, it's really a hard question to answer. I think we are still at a very early stage, and we are really at the beginning at the beginning of when things start changing. I think at there is a lot of talking about AI will replace software engineers and other this type of talks. I think there is a big danger for in general for or at least there will be a big shift for the whole knowledge base workforce. Let's say the white collars, basically the people that work with knowledge and creators. So and I think there is going to be a whole different way of working workflows we will need to learn, we will need to adapt, and as well as also maybe ways shifting up like our core skills. Because now, for example, a lot of technical people, they are really focused on the perfect technology, the perfect, also the beauty of the code base, the maintainability, and so on. Maybe our core skills will shift towards more building products. So really understanding what means building a product, and so being able to write the requirements and the specking up for these tools, as well as we will be, I think teams will be smaller most of the time, especially for scale up. So it means like being more in touch with the business, understanding what's going on. I think that these are going to be core skills that will need to be still learned, still adopted from software engineering. Yeah, from software engineers. So, for example, if I go back to my academic years when I was doing my bachelor and master in software engineering, I think we really didn't do anything about business, product, this type of topics. But I think that this will need to be changed eventually, also to educate the future software engineers. Yeah, but yeah, it's difficult to say, and I think it also depends on the context of the companies. Maybe startups can build their products much faster, but then scale ups, I think they can still, since usually they use well-known technologies that are also known by the machine learning systems, by the LLM systems. I think they cope with it. But I was reading today a post that, for example, companies like Facebook or the big techs, they have their own in-house frameworks or software. For them, it's much harder to adopt these tools because these LLMs, they are not trained on those type of frameworks, so they kind of need to spend effort and money to kind of train these tools or to fine tune them and so on. So yeah, it's an interesting shift that is difficult to predict. We'll see, but definitely I do feel that there will be a big shift in the core skills we will have to learn and apply as a software engineers in our job. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm completely in agreement with you. And even in a previous podcast, I had a conversation with another friend of mine, and it kind of made it as almost the same thing as when not the internet appeared, but when Google appeared and the democratization of knowledge. And probably it happened to you as well. I know it happened to me when I was in college in computer science. If you really wanted to search for something related with, I don't know, Java, C sharp was coming up, so let's say C++, you probably needed to find a book and read it in a book. And nowadays, before the AI, we had Stack Overflow. Like it was already way faster. And what I've seen as I've used Copilot as well, GitHub Copilot, is that it accelerates my work a lot because don't Google as much as I need to about doing some small function, like finding a way to optimize a function. Or in some cases, whenever there is a stack error, it's way easier to figure out where the error is, especially when they are very cryptic.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You can also see the faces because I think at 1 year ago I was doing this exactly this, right? I would always have usually I use Claude next to my screen or or ChatGPT, and I would have them always open to my next screen while I'm coding. I have something. Oh, I need to write this function. I need to understand this. I just would drop there and then take things, copy and paste. But now I have these tools integrated in my in my editor. So what it means is that I'm using either, by the way, myself. So I use it from the command line, even though I tried also other things. But it's really like this. Now I can put a comment in the code, and I can have a tag on something and say like, hey, and then you see that the tool that is running on my terminal that basically picks it up, and then it goes fixing things and changing things. And it's really, I don't even have to ask the question because it gets the context right away. So it definitely changes the way we work. And it makes us I wouldn't say more productive from day one, because there is always the paradox of productivity in this case. This is, I think, happened also when internet came to be, or we started becoming digital. At the beginning, there is this phase in which everyone has to figure out, okay, how am I productive with this? But then eventually, the workflows will emerge, and then all of us is going to kind of go through that threshold, and then there is a new ceiling of productivity that we need to reach, and it's going to be really interesting. So yeah, it's really incredible what they can do. And the funny thing is that before the podcast, I was also thinking like, okay, what is an event in the world that I remember that I can compare it with? You said Google, the democratization of the knowledge. I don't know. I think that this is even bigger in a sense, or maybe I didn't experience it back then. I didn't experience it from the same at the same age that I am today. But I feel like this is much more. It will have much more impact not only for us as a software engineers, but also for all the people we work with from other functions. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, indeed, it's a very impactful piece of technology, and especially with agent mode, it's really nice. Really like it. And that kind of leads me to a post that I saw from your side, which I found interesting, which was an interesting overview that you have on what is legacy and what is legacy code and how engineering teams should approach legacy code. So can we deep dive a bit on that and tell me a bit more about it?
Yeah, it's. I think the post said, I love legacy code" or something like that. It started. It was really controversial. Yeah, it's. Yeah, I think on social media, social networks, we also try to be a bit controversial, right? So yeah, so the I think that I don't think it's something that is very unique. What I think, because I hear a lot of other people that I follow, talking about the same thing. But just to tell you an example, so I remember it was 2019, so I was in a workshop with Sam Newman about microservices. And basically, Sam Newman just wrote the book, Migrating Monolith to Microservices. And I remember that he started the workshop. We were in a group in Amsterdam, and we started the workshop saying, okay, here we're going to talk about like, okay, now you have a monolith, you have this, and then we're going to talk about how you can refactor, rebuild this software in microservices. But he said, I will succeed in this workshop of 3 days if I convince you not to do it. And that was his initial statement. And everyone was like, okay, you're selling us microservices. What's happening here? No, I think it was really something that resonated, because then from that moment, I started really thinking about it. And, what I observed, so I mostly worked in a startup scale up. So usually companies that were born, let's say, up to 10 years ago. So and usually companies go in phases, right? There is a first phase where you just like you need to push something, then you kind of like you need to grow it to the first to more features and so on, and then you start creating the patterns. But usually those patterns are not really scalable, and then you get to a point where okay, now you need to scale it, but those patterns start getting in the way. So what I observed is that often when you get to the phase where the engineering teams maybe goes from a few people to 20 people or more. So there are more people working on the code base. There is this negativity that builds up on the system that is being managed, that eventually the system makes money for the company. And then the terms legacy starts being used a lot, and then eventually, then it falls into technical debt, and it falls into, okay, we need to rewrite this. And often we as engineers, we think, hey, we can rebuild this because we think it's everything in our head. But actually, it's much, much, much more difficult to do it because in that system that seems hard to manage, there is a sense. Often it's possible to find the sense of things, and there are so many edge cases that just are those edge cases that allow the company to get yet another customer, or maybe they create some competitive advantage compared to the competition and so on. And going to rebuild those edge cases is basically impossible. You're never gonna do that. So rebuilding is always a big risk. So I do think that our job as software engineers, actually our main job as software engineers that join this type of organization, is to go work with those systems and make them better. So that's why we get paid, I believe, and make them better so that the company can unlock yet another level of value for their customers. But often, I see this negativity that pushes, basically creates a push, creates some pressure to kind of like move away from the current technology. And I do believe that often we overcomplicate. So we start thinking about microservices, asynchronous communication, and all these things that they seem nicer and more tidy, but then eventually they add a lot of different type of challenges. So yeah, it's this is where I come from that post. And I also have to say that every time I work in this type of organization, I notice that I enjoy much more working in this type of systems because I really love to learn them. I really love to understand, okay, how this system came to be this way. What are all the things that happen here so that they can, create value for the customers and so on. And then building a mental model in my head and eventually start picturing, how can we move the code and organize the code? And usually the typical thing is that you organize the code from an horizontal layer to a vertical domains, right? But you can still do it in the same system without having to rebuild. So yeah, I do think that this is that's what this post comes from, and to me is often I want to say that don't do that unless you really, really have a strong impediment that if you don't do it, your company goes out. But instead, really fall in love with what the product does and why it does that way, and that system that supports the product, and try to make the system better. So that's my take on that. Yeah, and I honestly hate seeing companies sometimes throwing budget with this type of projects, and these projects they always take longer than it was expected, and then for really long these systems don't go to don't get in front of users, and in the meantime things have changed, and so it just often doesn't work. Yeah.
Indeed. Often gets the name something like either a transformation or Project Phoenix or something like that is going to be reborn from the ashes. So I think that's a great piece of advice for all of the engineers and product managers out there, is don't fall in that anti-pattern just because the technology looks cool and maybe your old system looks like legacy. There's still value in that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, because I've seen things happening, and so often what happens is that, especially when the rebuilding goes also in pieces, so often people say, but we're going to rebuild in peace, and we're going to extract just a small area, and we make it a microservice, and then we make another service here, and then we extract this. But there are usually two really hard things that happen in that moment. I mean, not only two, but technically these two. The first thing is that in the moment we put the system out, we put a network in between, and then the user experience for the customers, depending what will be that if that directly impact the customers or not. But anyway, in general, there is network in between, so there's something to manage. And usually to do this, people start thinking about, how do we now manage network security and so forth? And then the first thing they think about is Kubernetes. And maybe they don't have Kubernetes yet. And then they add Kubernetes in the mix, which is a great piece of tool. Once it's set up, it's amazing. Like, it creates so much resilience in your systems. But to move from not having it to have it and learn it, especially in that sense, it's really, really expensive and it's really, really costly. We did that in ASIC anywhere in the past, and it took us really years to really make sense of it. And the second thing that happened is that you need to move data. And moving data is one of the hardest things to do. Moving data from a piece, from a database to another, and making sure that, especially if you have to do it in a way that maybe you cannot afford too long downtime, so you really need consistency and so on, is really, really hard. Again, in Housing Anywhere, we had a project in which we had our database was in a virtual machine that we manage our own, and we wanted to move to a cloud managed solution because the operations for the database were really hard to do, and we needed to kind of some additional requirements in the database. It took us, I think, 1.5 years to figure out how to move this database to another side, and I think we did 3 attempts with 3 different approaches to kind of figure out. So it's really like a very hard problem to move data. And now also you're in the data space, so you also know how difficult it is to move data. Also, when maybe they can be denormalized, it's still very difficult. But if those data needs to be consistent and needs to bring the value to the to the customers, so they are really the main data use, it's even harder. So these 2 things, I think, really to me were the first biggest challenges that we see, and it already makes the project much more expensive than we thought it would be.
Yeah, I can attest to that 100%. As someone that spent many years doing data migrations, once we had a project that took 3 years just to figure out the data migration. So,
Yeah.
cautionary tale out there: if you're thinking that needs to be done for you to move for your legacy, think twice. It's not a fun project for anyone involved.
Yeah, and I also, another advice I give is that some time ago, I don't remember by whom, and I think we need to find it, but there was this concept of a livable code. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but basically the association was so basically the concept was okay. Think about when you look at a newspaper where you see like the sign of your living room, right? And then you see these beautiful, very well made living rooms where you see like beautiful color, great furniture, and so on. But then if you go look at that, further there, like, okay, maybe there is no side table on the couch where you can put your tea, or when you're watching TV, or maybe there is no I don't know, proper curtains on your windows to get more privacy. Maybe there is the TV is in a very weird angle that is really not comfortable to watch. So there are all these little things that you see it, and so it's beautiful, but it's not livable. But instead, if you go to a livable living room, is a living room where maybe things are a bit messier, there's a bit more chaos, but they have their own sense. And the concept was about this, right? Okay, your code base doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be livable. So if you understand in your code base where are the entry points, right? Or maybe the APIs, the cron jobs, or the consumers of events, and so on. You understand what they are, and then you start building a model how to follow through till the information gets in the database. I think you can really start figuring out, hey, okay, you become much more effective in a code base. You can figure out also the scenes, so where the boundaries are, and then start really remodeling those boundaries over time. And also by using techniques like domain-driven design or this type of principles, it really can happen. We were really successful in doing this on a project, and I do think that paid off so much because we were building features at the same time we were making everything better, and it took a while, longer than we wanted, and it never went like as we liked, but eventually the code was very livable, and we still had like 40-50 engineers working on the same code base, which was a monolith and was still very performant. So yeah,
we dropped a lot of good advices for people that are already in the industry. But let's say you're coming from fresh out of college, someone that is starting fresh today, maybe even you. You have the option to give yourself some advice on how to look forward in your career. So where would you focus your efforts? Where would you focus your learning if you're starting now?
Yeah, so it's I do think that what I would advise somebody starting that wants to become a software engineer, developers, I would advise them to really build a lot, build as much as you can, join somebody that can help you build, that allows you to build, maybe with somebody more experienced where they can learn. Because and build not for the sake of building and learning the technology, but build for the sake of creating something that becomes valuable for somebody, that really solves problems, that really look at that side of the product side, the science side, business side, so the part that creates value. Because then eventually, by building, also naturally nowadays everyone is using the AI powered editors or tools. So also I think this AI native generation, I would call, of software engineers, I think they will know much better how to use the tool. And the second piece of advice is that while building, so also try to understand the principle, the foundations of the craft that we do. So what does it mean architecting a system that scales? What does it mean all these terms are happening? Because this the principles eventually are always needed when we go into more situations where the technology needs really to scale much more. So what do you do if, for example, all the data don't fit in memory, right? So it starts becoming a different problem. What do you do if you have a system that is lower than all the other systems that cannot cope with those systems? So you have a queue problem. So how do you do this type of how do you manage this type of situation? I think that eventually, still learning these principles, and this can be done through like even online courses, things like that. Or maybe reading books about. I think I learned a lot by learning about the Kafka and all the streaming processing systems. I think they really tell you a lot about how they are designed for scale. So I think these type of things are still important. So first of all, build. Get familiar with the tooling. Get familiar. Just show that you can build something, and then also on the side learn how to what it means building scalable system, distributed systems. So a bit of theory around that. Yeah.
And that sounds like a great piece of advice for us to call this show an end. If people want to learn more about you, if people want to follow you, learn what you are working on, what is the best place for them to go?
Definitely LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is where I am. Usually where I post. I haven't posted for a couple of weeks now because I was busy with the product we were trying to launch. But I'm on LinkedIn, and soon I think I will also launch my personal website, mostly for my consultancy job that I'm launching. But LinkedIn, and I love to hear from people to know what they're building, especially how they're using AI. And if they want to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk.
Super. I'll make sure that I'll put all the links in the show notes so that people can find it. Again, Simone, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
And to everyone else out there, see you again away from the keyboards.